right. Wonderful. We are moving on. So our next panel is on migration, and we also launched a poll. So looking at the poll, yes, about what percentage of disease risk is estimated to be related to genetic factors? The correct answer is 30%. So about 39% of you got that correct. Nice work. Okay, so the next panel, as I mentioned, is on migration. The professor is Xin-Chi Chang from the School of Development and Public Policy at Fudan. So let me go ahead and give you some more information about Dr. Chen, our moderator. She is associate professor in the Department of Sociology at Fudan University. She received her PhD from the Department of Community Health Sciences at UCLA. Woohoo, me too. She was postdoctoral fellow at the Institute of Sociology at Academia Sinica from 2014 to 15, and worked as an assistant professor at the Institute of Health Behaviors and Community Science at Taiwan University from 2015 to 19. She is a mixed methods social scientist working with migration and other migrants and other minority populations. Her current research interests are around the emerging forms of intra-Asia migration and their patterns, processes, and consequences. Please welcome Dr. Chang to be moderator for our panel.
Okay, so thanks for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the panel of migration for this Global Health Conference. I appreciate the opportunity to moderate this session. So today we have three speakers from three different time zones. So we have Professor Viteri from Quito, and Professor Wang from Taipei, and Mrs. Guanzhen from California, I believe. So without further ado, let me introduce the first speaker. So the rule is the same. Each one has 13 minutes, and we hope to keep 10 minutes for the discussion after all the three presentations. And so please use the QA function for any questions you have. Okay, so Professor Maria Emilia Viteri is a research professor at the Department of Anthropology in Universidad San Francisco de Quito. She's also a research associate with the Department of Anthropology at University of Maryland in College Park. So she holds a PhD in cultural anthropology from American University in Washington, D.C., and she has published extensively in English and Spanish for academics, for academic audience, media, and to inform public policy. Her book, Desportes, Translating Racial, Ethnic, Sexual, and Gender Identities Across the Americas, was published in 2014. Her latest research looks at how the pandemic has intensified housing insecurity and in turn aggravated gender-based violence. So her talk title today is The Impact of COVID-19 on Immigrants in Ecuador. So let's welcome Professor Viteri.
Thank you so much for your introduction. And it's a pleasure to be here with everyone. I'm going to share my screen. And let me know if you can hear me correctly. So Ecuador is both a site of transit and destination for people in situation of mobility. That is to say, asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants, as well as survivors of trafficking coming from Venezuela. The Venezuelan migrant and refugee community is the largest in Latin America and the Caribbean. According to the Observatorio for Migrants and Refugees from Venezuela, there are 417,000 Venezuelans living in Ecuador, a country with a population of 17 million, characterized by social inequality, high rates of gender-based violence and among the highest teenage pregnancy rates. A large percentage of the Ecuadorian population does not have an adequate income or access to resources. For example, 56% of the economically active population is underemployed or does not have a job. 2 out of 10 households do not have access to water inside their home. That is, 20% of the population is more vulnerable to COVID-19 because of lack of water. Current President Moreno's approach to the COVID-19 pandemic has favored a policy of economic and social austerity, as well as prioritizing control policies over epidemiological surveillance. According to the Social Observatory of Ecuador, there are an additional of 500,000 unemployed people and 200,000 in addition who have fallen into underemployment. President Moreno's government faces a governance crisis at all levels, as exemplified by corruption in the purchase of medical supplies, the documented cases of bodies of people who died of COVID-19 and disappeared in hospitals within the public health system, and massive protests against economic policies. Together with organization Diálogo Diverso, my team and I analyzed the impact of the current pandemic in the situation of LGBTI immigrants and refugees coming from Venezuela. Thousands of Venezuelans, as you might have seen and heard, have had to migrate due to the catastrophic economic, political, and social conditions of Venezuela, hand in hand with the exclusion they have suffered due to their sexual identity and/or gender presentation that goes beyond the expected cultural norm. Diálogo Diverso organization works to support and improve the living conditions of the Venezuelan lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender population in Ecuador. I frame the intersections of mobility between mobilities, gender, and sexualities within that of COVID-19 health emergency declared in March, considering that the prejudice against Venezuelans by the Ecuadorian population has increased with the pandemic. We conducted interviews, focus groups, and surveys in three cities: Quito, the capital city, Guayaquil, and Manta, located in the coast. We also realized the challenges that the population have faced within as participants of this research, which are, in addition to added lack of income, also food insecurity, no access to Wi-Fi or smartphones. The pre-pandemic scenarios present deep health risks that are deepened within these intersections. The latter within a system in which public institutions are saturated, considering again corruption, together with current public policy that does not necessarily address immigrants and refugees, with mixed immigrants such as Venezuelan communities face extreme vulnerability. When we talk about day-to-day subsistence, the World Food Programme has identified as of January 2020 that the search for food security is one of the main causes of migration and departure from Venezuela and continues to be an issue at the countries of reception. One of the most common strategies to obtain income is street vending in public spaces and transportation, which involves constant exposure to daily situations of xenophobia and discrimination, as well as police violence. Visa requirements becomes another obstacle since Ecuador has one among the most expensive visas in the region. Human Rights Watch, for instance, has warned that governments are taking advantage of the pandemic to promote xenophobic rhetoric and policies, therefore the importance of protecting community organizations and civil society. We have identified 6 main variables that you can see in your screen that turn out to be more complex and precarious in the context of the current pandemic: work, survival, housing, health, education, and food security. This context exacerbates the insecurity of informal and autonomous work and the violence suffered in public spaces, which exposes LGBT, migrant, and refugees to serious forms of police violence. In the context of the pandemic, informal commerce becomes a riskier job at several levels. due to exposure to COVID-19, due to police violence that harasses workers where many times the same police seize their goods, and due to possible non-compliance with mobility restrictions. Threefold intertwined precariousness, unemployment or precarious work that speak directly to the lack of health and well-being, in addition to housing, accommodation, and food and nutritional insecurity. For instance, as you can see in your screen, 73% of the communities that we work with said they were unemployed. Among the main activities that are being developed are street vending, 8% sex work, sex for survival, 5% provision of cleaning services. High rates of discrimination in the provision of public services have been identified. Among those specifically, 50% indicated having suffered some form of situation of xenophobia. Discrimination in public spaces is among the highest with 40%, followed by discrimination by healthcare providers with 27%. 25% of the population that we work with has suffered physical violence for being Venezuelan in Ecuador, so based on country of origin, and 14% mentioned that they have suffered violence based on being LGBT, and also 11% have suffered sexual violence. And when I'm talking about sexual violence, we are referring to sexual abuse or harassment, rape, trafficking, forced prostitution in Ecuador. In addition to more than 57% have suffered psychological violence, including coercion, manipulation, and being subject to insults because of being Venezuelan in Ecuador, and the combination of being Venezuelan and LGBTI, and all the other vulnerabilities that I have mentioned. So the impacts of the pandemic, as you can see, have indicated that the loss of income with the loss of employment and the impossibility of legalizing immigration status means that health and treatment for immigrants and refugees with pre-existing conditions is extremely difficult. And again, when it was noted that some of the reasons in which LGBT people leave Venezuela, in addition to the ones already stated, are people living with HIV because there are no resources or no access to PrEP or PEP in Venezuela. In Ecuador, when public healthcare is inaccessible, LGBT migrants and refugees are forced to access private healthcare, which has led to situations of debt with employers and exploitation. I also want to mention sex for survival, which is highly violent and risky, involves exposure to trafficking. We regrettably had different cases of trafficking during the pandemic, and also we also saw different cases for exchange of sex, so sex for survival, for housing and food. Economic insecurity hence derives in housing insecurity and homelessness, generalized situations of eviction and expulsions, which in turn creates this circle of added vulnerability. In terms of heteronormative perceptions of family, our research findings also found out that the way in which LGBT migrants and refugees are portrayed are imagined as people without ties. That is to say, regarding family or partner relationships, and this limits the response that the organizations, international, local, and other organizations might have, as they usually do have children and they are their own families, but they are not considered as such. In addition, return to Venezuela, although, as you know, there have been an important number of Venezuelans that have walked literally back from Ecuador to Venezuela, is unfeasible or requires a lack of safety in the way back, violence, militarization of borders, and a dreadful scenario when they go back home. What are some of the more urgent needs in this scenario? Prevent discrimination, have access to housing, prevent evictions, regularization of immigration status, access to healthcare services, psychological support. and also to highlight the role of civil society and grassroots organizations that, although have limited funds, they have been able to collaborate and create a network of support. When considering global health, we need to consider the variable of human mobility as a crucial one. Some things that we can do is hold governments accountable for a humanitarian approach to migration. And at the same time, some of the lessons learned is to revisiting our own prejudices in order to continue to fight xenophobia, fight LGBT discrimination, and as such, achieve racial justice. And in this way, feed or support or contribute to global health that is characterized by well-being, taking in consideration again, the central role that human mobility plays at this crucial time in our current pandemic. And with that, I'm going to finish. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Okay, appreciate the great presentation from Professor Viteri. So let's move on to our second speaker for today. So the second speaker, Professor Wang Lirong, is from Taiwan University, and she is now a full professor in the Department of Social Work. She finished her PhD from School of Social Welfare at UCLA, with research focusing on gender justice workplace, gender-based violence, and migrant workers' well-being. Dr. Wang was a visiting professor in Kyoto and University in Japan, in UCLA, and in University of Oxford. Dr. Wang has published several books such as Women and Social Policy and Risk Society in Asian Cities, and more than 55 papers in the research areas such as gender and social empowerment, family, and the states. In addition to her academic work, she is active in NGOs and in different levels of governmental agencies in Taiwan by advocating gender equality and women's rights. So her talk title today is Gender and Inclusion, Taking Migrant Workers as an Example. So let's welcome Professor Wang.
Hope you're unmuted.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good, thank you. It's my great pleasure to participate in this conference, and I changed a little bit about my topic. The topic today is migrant workers' well-being in Taiwan from social inclusive perspective. And next, please. This is my outline in this presentation. First part regarding the background, second part with regard to theoretical concept, then go to methodology and data analysis, then make conclusion for this paper. Next, please. Then go to the first part, thanks. But next, please. This is the picture regarding migrant workers in Taiwan. You can see the trend. Taiwan has experienced demographic change similar to any other societies, where the proportion of young generation has become increasingly low in terms of population. While elderly population has become increasingly high, the number of older adults has a high proportion. Now it's moving toward aging society. So the way to resolve this problem of care the elderly, we take the one of the primary solution is to hire migrant workers. And the employment initiative from migrant workers in Taiwan has traced back to 1992. Now the number of the migrant workers has reached up to the 260,000. And Taiwan's migrant workers primarily consist of from the 4 countries. Next, please. And 99%, a majority of the migrant workers are from Indonesia, from Philippines, and Vietnam. And the majority of them are female. Next, please. And the reason, next, please. The reason of employer hire migrant workers can include several parts. First one, the advantage. Next, please. Next, please. And the majority of the advantage of hiring migrant worker, including the worker can be work and social hours, and their work ethic might be better. Next, please. And then there's some disadvantage for the workers because of language and communication. Next, please. From the human side, we would say this is a human right to study their well-being in any society who just live. So we take the purpose of this study as the follows. The purpose of this study will explore how is the contextual factor influencing the well-being of the migrant workers, and how is the policy should be changed to help them to integrate to the society. Next, please. So we will examine the well-being of the migrant worker from the perspective of social inclusion. And this is the theoretical and research conceptual framework. Next, please. And then we'll move to the part 2, talk about the theories about this research. But because of time limit, I only mentioned some terms and social inclusion and some others. And I'm not going to the work and life balance issue because time limit. Next, please. In our study, we focus on social inclusion. So what is the social inclusion in this study? We highly emphasize social participation, and we also emphasize on the difference of the participation and which can be respected in our society. So we use some definition of the social inclusion and major social inclusion in several perspectives. Next, please. And this main focus will be like how social inclusion can be the determinant of the mental health and well-being. So finally, you will find out social inclusion can be a very important factor affecting the people who are living in our society, particularly from other countries. In our study, we call the migrant care workers. Next, please. I would have mentioned some specific methodology issues. The first one will regarding our measurement, then talk about the data collection. Then we move to the data analysis. So this is my methodology part, which I'm going to share to you. Next, please. And in the first part of methodology, I'm going to tell you about what is well-being. In our well-being measurement, we use WHO developed from WHO called WHO 5 Well-being Index, which is very efficient in terms of subject psychological well-being measure. And only 5 items we used in this measurement. Next, please. Then we use the social inclusion measure. As you know, social inclusion is quite broad in terms of a concept. But here, a very good measurement, which we find out, called a social inclusion matrix, done by Hooley and Evan. And they have done a lot of research regarding this part. And majorly, they use 14 items to measure what is social inclusion from the 2 parts. First part is access to opportunity of the source. And second part is the satisfaction to the opportunities. So in this paper, we defined this paper in terms of collecting data through 2 approaches. One is access approach. The other is satisfaction approach. Then next, please. Based on this definition, we collect data and through the questionnaire. And our questionnaire has been developed for language, Chinese, Vietnamese, Indonesia, and English, because we have different kind of big nationality of the migrant workers. And the well-being measurements is basically derived, as I mentioned before, WHO well-being index. And the social inclusion matrix is designed by Hooley and other scholars of these activities. And the data collected from the Taipei City, Taichung City, and Tainan City, the total number is 187. And data was collected through the face-to-face interview by different interviewers from Indonesia, in Philippines, and others. Certainly, we have done a lot of training for them to do interview. Next, please. Then let's go to the data analysis. You can see our data analysis framework. Next, please. This is our data analysis framework based on our data, our research framework. So I'm talking about how is the relationship between those variables. First one, let's go back to our well-being. Next, please. In the findings, we find out the well-being among the migrant workers is not too bad, about 70 to 80 score in terms of satisfaction of the well-being. And then let's look at the social inclusion, because I mentioned before, social inclusion is quite comprehensive. So we use a factor analysis to simplify our factors. And we find out 3 factors are very well explained. Next, please. And this is the 3 factors from the access approach to say what is social inclusion. First one is conclusion, community inclusion. And then second is social attainment, involvement. And then third one is social and economic security. So this is called the social inclusion factor from the access approach, we find out. And we found that these 3 factors can explain about more than 64% of variance of social inclusion. Next, please. And then we also do the social inclusion factors on satisfaction. And we find out 3 factors can be generalized. One is community inclusion. And then second one is community, family inclusive. Then third one is social inclusive. Next, please. And this is the final session. We are going to talk about data analysis, talk about social inclusion factors. This is our new finding from this research. Access approach, we can find what is social inclusion, 3 factors. From the satisfaction approach, we can find 3 factors in terms to explain what is social inclusion. Next, please. Then we go down to see what is the relationship between those factors. Next, please. We can see some very impressive data. Next, please. Because of time, we skip this. This is the relationship between all the factors of social inclusion. Next, please. And we also see the well-being between the social inclusion and well-being, the strong relationship you can see from the data. Next, please. Then go to the last part, conclusion. Since here are a lot of factors related to the social inclusion, we find out the relationship between the social inclusion and well-being. So we conclude several policies for the government, which will be more visible to help people to be included or integrated into the community. First one we call community capital policy. In our study, what is community capital study? We mentioned that if people can include it in the community, then the society can be more inclusive by taking care of the migrant worker. So we will give you the idea later, but this is a very important finding, talking about how people can be inclusive, how people can be feel included in the society. The way doing that is to develop community capital policy for the migrant workers. Next, please. And secondly, we also find other policy and program for the government. First one, the one is called human capital. That means from individual perspective, we find out if we want to help migrant workers to be included in the society, no, don't forget how to develop people to be a better human being in any inclusive society. That means we call human capital approach policy for the migrant workers. Next, please. So we come out the final conclusion here. Well-being is so important for migrant workers. Although their well-being is not too bad in general in Taiwan society, but we still have a lot of work to do. So we generalize two approach. One is community capital approach, and the other is the human capital approach in terms of for developing policy and programs. And to build up the better human capital policies, we think from our findings, we need to educate and give more training focus for the society. And for the build up community capital, we wish the government can build community accepting society for the migrant workers. This is our ending in this research. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, I appreciate Professor Wang's talk on migrant workers' well-being. So let's move on to our third presentation to Miss Angela Guanzhen. Am I doing it right? So Miss Angela Guanzhen was born and raised in the Philippines. She currently works full-time as a medical biller and coder, a survivor leader, and a member of the CAST Survivor Leadership Program. She was a 2016 fellow for the Human Trafficking Leadership Academy, supported by the Office of the Trafficking in Persons at the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. She participated in the Department of 40 Hours Human Trafficking Investigation course with California Commission on Peace Officer Standard and Training. She was awarded the CAST Resilience Award and was recognized by U.S. Congressman Royce for her courage and leadership. Ms. Guanzhen is an independent consultant to various local and federal agencies, for which she develops and provides training to healthcare providers, victim advocates, and law enforcement workforces. Her talk title today is Migrants and Their Vulnerability to Human Trafficking. Let's welcome Ms. Guanzhen. I think you need to unmute yourself.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to share my.
Is it possible for you to speak louder? Because yes. I couldn't hear you.
Yeah. Okay. Can you hear me? Okay. So let me get my. I don't know what happened to my. My screen. Can you see my screen? No.
Yes. Can you switch to full screen?
Yes. I think I have to do this. There you go.
Yeah. Great.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. So thank you, Ms. Chang. I'm so glad that I was part of this convention. So my name is Angela Guanzhen, and I'm a survivor, an advocate. I was recruited from the Philippines to work as a caregiver in the facility in California. My trafficker was also Filipino. She's a mother of 4 with 2 daughters, same age as me. I came to the United States with a lawful visa and a promise to have a good job. my trafficker is the only person I know in the US. When I arrived in the United States, my passport was taken away from me, and I was told it would be held for me for safekeeping. I was so happy and overwhelmed that I didn't mind. I didn't even ask question why. And of course, in our country, it's not really important of you keeping your identification. So I trusted her, and so I listened to her whatever she said. So when I get to the US, things were very different than I thought. So I was told I owed her $12,000 for my transportation to the United States and for my visa. And my trafficker told me my salary will be $600 a month. And for me, coming from the Philippines, you have to convert, okay, $600, you convert into peso, and it's a big money. So, but she told me that she will deduct the $300 for the money that I owed her. And I would have to work for her for 10 years. I work I work in a retirement home for the elderly, which located in a suburb of LA. I work 18 hours a day with no day off, had to sleep on the floor in the hallway, and we ate table scrap. There was a shopping center 6 blocks away from us, and sometimes my coworker and I take turn to get some Chinese food or McDonald's. And when my trafficker found out, she told us that we need to be very careful because walking in the street, especially at night, and if the police see us, they might ask us about our ID, and since we don't have one to show them, the police can take us away and put us in jail. So she told us that there were a lot of requirements to get an ID, so we don't really need the ID. And since we're working inside a home, so my coworker and I threatened that if we try to escape, we would be deported by calling the police and telling them that we stole something from her. And this went on for 2.5 years. And until finally I was helped by the FBI after the neighbor noticed that I never had a day off. I spoke about what happened to me to the FBI, and eventually they asked me to testify against my trafficker in a criminal court. So she got a 5-year prison sentence, and I choose to be an advocate so I could share my story and help people understand and aware about human trafficking. And also I know that there's a lot of victims out there still hiding and scared. And I want them to hear my story so they know that there is hope. And also for the victim to know that they should not be ashamed or blame themselves, because it's not their fault, because that's how I felt before when I was starting. They need to know that whatever happened to them, it's not their fault, it's not their choice, because when you get into the situation, you don't really have a choice to choose to go home, because if I'm gonna go home, how am I gonna pay the money that I owed her? And she told me that I can't really go home, because basically she told me that she owed me. So, and especially now that this COVID-19 pandemic, I believe that there's many people, not only in the Philippines, not only in my country, but also from other countries, that will take any chances that they can, believing that there's a good opportunity for them to and for their family to work here in the United States or in any other country. So that's a little bit of my story. And so human trafficking, we define it a sex so there's two kind of well, it's not only two, but in the US there's two definition of human trafficking. So it's a sex trafficking in which a commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, or in which the person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age, or the recruitment, like in my case, I was recruited and harbored for obtaining of a person for labor services. And I was through fraud and a coercion for the purpose of subjection to involuntary servitude, peonage, bondage, or slavery. So limited scope of human trafficking data. The only reason that we can't, according to International Labor Organization and Global Slavery Index, Department of Justice from California Attorney General, this was the Human Trafficking Report 2012 Global Slavery Index. So 21 million people lured into forced labor, and 45,800,000 people in slavery around the world. That has 150 billion businesses. So, but in what we know about human trafficking, it's a global issue. It is the second largest organization crime, but it receives a little fund or support from our government, as opposed to drug trade, and also we cannot really get a exact amount for the data, because there's a lot of victims that out there that haven't identified yet. So who are trafficked and enslaved persons? Anyone can be trafficked and enslaved. It's from children to elderly and any levels of education. In my survivor group, there's some teachers, nurses, or engineers that, when they get here, they work as a nanny or work in a hotel. So who are the traffickers? Is anyone? Sometimes you don't even think that your neighbors, because it's like my trafficker. She's a mother of 4. She's like a regular mom that has a SUV that pick up her kids. She's like a mom that when you see her, she's just a regular citizen of the United States, but you wouldn't think that she's a trafficker. And we have a lot of also in our group, there's a lot of members that they were enslaved or trafficked by diplomats. And what kind of industries are people trafficked into? So you wouldn't think that this industries you can find a lot of traffic victim, but I'm not saying that all of them are, but you could find a victim in here. And modern slavery, it's a prison without walls, because basically you're working long hours. Like me, I work 18 hours a day, 7 days a week, no day off. I get $300 paid, and also my trafficker holding my documents. And some of our members, they were also their trafficker also threatened not only them but also their family. That okay, so when you leave, we know where you live. We know where your family lives, so you gotta be careful. And why people decide to migrate, like for me, I came to the US for the opportunity, and also economic, social, and one of our panelists earlier I'm so sorry, I couldn't get your name, but she mentioned that from Guatemala, because of the oppression and the brutality of the police, it's like basically the living condition. That's what make people decided to migrate. Why migrants are vulnerable to human trafficking? Because like my situation, I don't know my rights when I came here. I depend on my trafficker because she's the only person that I know here, and I trusted her. And also, like Professor Wang mentioned earlier, we need to change the policy from our country. Sorry, my thing is impact to health due to trafficking, deprivation, social restriction, using of drugs and alcohol. These, especially drugs and alcohol, these are the impacts that, it lasts long with the victim. Even though they come out with their situation, they still, they still hook with drugs and alcohol and abuse and violence. And some of our members are, after their situation, even though they came out, and they have legal documents. Sometimes they trap into another enslavement, because sometimes I guess we kind of culturally hard to understand that it's not that we're not supposed to do that. But I guess because we get used to, or it's so hard for us to get out from the situation. Abuse in human trafficking. We could find it psychologically, emotionally, behavioral, physical. Trafficker often use drugs and alcohol, especially with the sex trafficking victim. Verbally, I was not. I always said that I'm lucky that I wasn't physically abused, but I was verbally abused. And sometimes being verbally abused is more, it's not, I'm not saying that it's worse than physically, but sometimes emotionally it has a long impact. Common diagnosis among human trafficking, like until now, I still have my low back pain. I don't think the low back pain we're gonna get, because is gonna heal, because the nature of our work, what we've done before. And also one of our member in my group, she has the skin problems because her trafficker used to ask her to wash clothes with her hand, and cleaning bathroom, or anywhere in the house using the chemicals without the gloves. Health effects of human trafficking. The study, it has a study of from 192 female survivors of sex trafficking within 14 days of receiving services. 63% reported that more than 10 concurrent physical health problems, have a headache, fatigue, back pain, memory problem, and sexual and reproductive health problems, including vaginal discharge, pelvic and vaginal pain, gynecological infection, and dysuria. And also, I guess the most common is the mental health assessment. It has the high levels of depression, anxiety, and so health effects of human trafficking. There was a study in Europe that it was found that 77% has the symptoms of PTSD, depression, and anxiety. And also it was from the brothel, Israel. It has, again, the depression and the PTSD and the suicidal thoughts as a big impact in the survivor and the victim. So what you can do, you can raise awareness, give back, and take action. Host an event and talk about the issue, because I guess, especially in our country, we don't really talk about this. That's why, because me, when I came, I don't even know that I'm a victim. We don't really understand about human trafficking. Be aware for the resources, event that you can attend, so you can be updated with the issue. And also volunteer and donate financially or your time. There's always in the shelter, if you can connect to the nonprofit organization, you can get you can donate your time. There's always needed for something, and be active for any policies that needed your participation. So in the US, help with victim response in the US, you can call 911 and or you can call CAST hotline. It's 888 key to free. It's 888-539-2373, or the National Human Trafficking Hotline. It's 1-888-373 and 788. So thank you for listening, but I just couldn't find my there you go. So thank you, and I hope sharing my story, giving you an information, and if you have any question, you can email me or we can connect.
Okay, thank you, Miss Angela Kwanzan, for the very impressive sharing, and it's very informative. So actually, I had the honor to co-organize a few workshops with a coalition for the residents at the shelter when I was a graduate student at UCLA. I have to say that individuals with such a tremendous amount of courage are true inspirations. So now we have 10 minutes for the QA. We have collected a few questions here. So let me read one question for the first two speakers. So this is someone from Southern Medical University, China. So he would like to ask Professor Viteri and Professor Wang. So please turn on your camera. Yes, thank you. So would you say global health actors or systems contributed enough in advocating or improving interventions toward migrants in the midst of COVID-19, especially migrant workers like truck drivers who face discrimination and mistreatment during delivery of goods across countries? So this is a question for the first two speakers. And there were a few questions for Professor Viteri on the LGBTI migrants vulnerability, and especially the mental level. So, and is there provision by government to provide social support although they are migrants? And so that's basically the summary of questions. And Professor, and for Ms. Kwanzan, so there was I think audience from Philippines were asking how can we decrease the underage virtual sexual trafficking, the problem. And also there was one. So why don't we invite Professor Viteri to answer first? Maybe we have like 3 minutes. Okay.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to do that. And thanks again for your excellent questions. What I have seen in my research, both in Ecuador as well as in the United States, I see no improvement in interventions towards migrant workers, but exactly the opposite. So the conditions have worsened with COVID-19. And I hopefully I can say that I see a light at the end of the tunnel. Currently, I don't. But it requires, as I said in my talk, that we all unite and hold governments accountable and also strengthen civil society so that we can improve the ways in which immigrants are treated, are understood, are imagined. And then in terms of the question, I think it was Charles who was talking about providing legal status and securing access. So Charles was asking about what's happening in Venezuela and if there's any provision of human rights for LGBT people. And my answer is no. In fact, as I mentioned, what we found out in my research study is that more than 50% of the LGBT Venezuelan immigrants and refugees left Venezuela because of the extreme discrimination they faced as based on their sexual and or gender identity, and the zero lack of access to, for example, HIV clinics, which we do have in Ecuador. And in Ecuador, we have also legal marriage, for example, and our constitution prohibits discrimination based on gender and sexual identity. And the last question, I believe it had to do with support if there's what happens with mental health. Amelia, and I think that's again another excellent question. Well, there's no little to non-service provision in terms of mental health, except for some of the organizations like the one that I work with, like Diálogo Diverso, other organizations that protect victims of human trafficking, like Alas de Colibrí, and they are doing this titanic work with little resources to really try to protect the communities, immigrant communities, and also communities, Venezuelans, for example, trans female workers that have faced trafficking and have survived. And in terms of provision of mental health, only HIV/AIDS clinics in the main cities, according to my research, provide some form of mental health. But other than that, mental health, aside from these organizations, is not provided. And I believe I covered all the questions. Ms. Chang, is that right?
Okay, so thank you very much. So Professor Viteri actually agrees she would type more in details if you have further questions. So let's invite, now is Professor Wang. Would you please answer the questions?
Question?
We couldn't hear you. Yeah,
Oh,
now
sorry.
it works.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I understand your question. You're asking about the impact of the COVID-19 to the migrant workers, particularly, right?
Yes.
Okay. Certainly in Taiwan, we do a lot of prevention program for the migrant care workers. First one, national insurance cover everyone, including migrant care workers or any migrant care workers. So that means if we do have a very good health care program, that will be preventive for the migrant worker to get kind of sick of COVID-19. And secondly, Taiwan is a society full of civil society force, particularly the we call women's migrant worker awakening programs, which has been done by many civil society, have advocate the right of migrant workers at the stage of COVID-19. So totally, I would say yes. Government try to pay attention to migrant workers might be the victims of COVID-19, but not so much as I have seen in Taiwan. So that's my answer.
Okay, thank you very much. So here is one more question for Ms. Guanzhen. So the audience would like to know, how is human trafficking being addressed in Southeast Asia, to your knowledge? Yeah. Please turn on your microphone.
So yes, so I am not really active outside the U.S. Because I was here, but I know sometimes when we do the Department of Health, Defense here, that we sometimes they connect to the other, when they do the reporting, they have the report from other country. But so I don't really have an idea how they address the human trafficking in Southeast Asia, because I'm pretty sure that it's not good as that we have in here in US. But I'm willing to reach out or help. How can we share what we do? That way we could apply it also from Southeast Asia, not only in in all country.
Okay, and there was another question on the virtual sexual trafficking.
Yes, I was typing, but I wasn't finished. But I know in the Philippines, it's so hard for them to understand, because I used to, I am listening or watching the documentary about sexually exploited kids. And the problem is, it's not only the kids, they don't understand that it's not right. And the mother was the one who trafficked them. The mother was the one who's doing it for them. So for them, they don't understand it. It's not right. And I guess for the that is the only resources for them for them to eat. So I can't tell what to do, but maybe we can reach out to them and make them understand that it is not right. And I think we also need help from our government to give them resources, you know.
Mhm. All right, thank you very much for our three great speakers and who gave us three great presentations. So migration is becoming way more important in the Asia Pacific region compared to pre-2000 era. So that's hopeful that we have more research, more young people coming and to work together on this issue.